Right now, somewhere on this planet, a person is dying from the heat. Not from heatstroke in the dramatic sense you imagine. Not collapsed on a road under a brutal sun. Dying quietly. In a room. With a fan running, and here is what nobody told them before it was too late: the fan was not helping. It was finishing the job. This is not a story about climate change in the abstract. This is a story about a specific number, a number that meteorologists have been tracking for over 2 centuries, that climate scientists have been warning about for decades, and that almost nobody outside of research labs has ever heard of. It is the number your body is negotiating with every hot day. And above a certain value, your body loses that negotiation. Every time. Without exception, the number is called wet bulb temperature. And understanding it will permanently change how you think about heat, humidity, fans, and the increasingly dangerous summers ahead. Start with the basics. When you are hot, your body has one primary strategy: sweat, except that is not quite right. Sweating is not the strategy. Sweating is the preparation. The actual strategy is evaporation. Here is the distinction that matters. When sweat forms on your skin, it sits there as liquid water. That liquid does nothing on its own. It is the transition, liquid turning into vapor, that carries heat away from your body. Evaporation is an energy-hungry process, and the energy it consumes comes from you. From your skin. That is how you cool down. Remove evaporation from the equation and sweat becomes meaningless. You can pour sweat. Your skin can be soaked. And your core temperature will still rise. Your body produces heat constantly. Not just when you exercise. Always. Your heart beating, your liver processing, your brain firing electrical signals, all of it generates thermal energy. At rest, you are producing approximately 80 watts of heat. That is roughly the output of an old incandescent light bulb, running inside your chest, continuously. Start walking briskly and that number climbs toward 300 watts. Do heavy physical work outdoors in summer heat and you are generating somewhere between 600 and 800 watts, all of that heat has to leave your body somehow. Evaporation handles the majority of it. Which means that anything that interferes with evaporation is not merely uncomfortable. It is dangerous, and one thing interferes with evaporation more than anything else: humidity. You have felt this. A 35-degree day in a dry climate feels manageable. The same temperature in humid air feels suffocating. The reason is not psychological. It is thermodynamic. Air has a limited capacity to hold water vapor. In dry conditions, that capacity is largely unfilled. When sweat forms on your skin, there is plenty of room in the surrounding air for it to evaporate into. The process happens quickly. You might not even notice you are sweating because the moisture vanishes almost immediately. In humid air, the situation reverses. The atmosphere is already packed close to its moisture limit. When sweat tries to evaporate, it finds almost no available space. The process stalls. Moisture accumulates on your skin instead of leaving it. And your cooling system, which depends entirely on that evaporation, starts to fail. Meteorologists developed a tool over 200 years ago to measure exactly how well evaporation can work at any given moment. It is called a wet bulb thermometer, and it is almost absurdly straightforward in its design. Take a standard thermometer. Wrap the sensing end in a small piece of damp cloth. Expose it to the air. As moisture evaporates from the cloth, it cools the thermometer below the actual air temperature. How much it cools tells you exactly how efficiently evaporation is working. The reading you get, the wet bulb temperature, is one of the most important numbers in climate science. And it is almost completely absent from public weather reporting. In dry air, the wet bulb temperature sits significantly below the actual air temperature. The gap between the two tells you that evaporation has room to work. As humidity rises, that gap closes. When the air reaches 100% relative humidity, evaporation stops entirely. The wet bulb temperature and the air temperature become the same number. And that convergence has a name in the context of human survival. It is called a threshold. And crossing it kills people. The number is 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb. To understand why this specific number matters, you need to hold on to one other figure, your core body temperature, which sits at approximately 37 degrees Celsius. For heat to flow out of your body into the surrounding environment, the environment needs to be cooler than you. That temperature gradient is what allows heat transfer to occur. But temperature alone is not the complete picture. At a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees, the air is not just hot, it is so saturated with moisture that evaporation from human skin effectively ceases. Your body cannot dump heat through evaporation. It cannot dump sufficient heat through radiation. The gradient is gone. The exit route is closed, and your body does not stop producing heat just because it cannot remove it. Core temperature begins to climb. Unlike a fever, which is the body deliberately raising its own temperature as an immune response, this rise is uncontrolled. The body is not doing this strategically. It is simply failing to prevent it. The progression moves from heat exhaustion to heat stroke to organ failure. The timeline, under sustained wet bulb conditions above 35 degrees, is measured in hours. This is the wall. Below it, your body can fight. It can sweat more, increase blood flow to the skin, reduce internal heat production. Below it, the physics are in your favor. Above it, none of those adaptations are sufficient. The physics have closed the door. Now we can return to the fan.in normal conditions. A fan works by increasing the rate of air movement across your skin. Moving air accelerates evaporation. That is the entire mechanism. The fan does not produce cool air. It makes evaporation happen faster, which removes heat from your body faster. This works brilliantly when the conditions allow evaporation to function, but there is a temperature threshold, around 35 degrees Celsius air temperature, coinciding closely with skin surface temperature, above which the fan changes what it is doing to you. When the air being blown across your skin is hotter than your skin, you are no longer losing heat to that air. You are absorbing it. The moving air is transferring its thermal energy into you through convection. You have just turned a cooling device into a heating device. The fan is now functioning as a convection heater pointed directly at your body. Add near threshold humidity to this scenario and the result becomes acute. Evaporation is already failing due to the moisture saturation in the air. The fan cannot restore evaporation. But it continues increasing the rate at which hot air deposits its heat into your skin. You are losing the heat battle faster than you would have been losing it in still air. This has been documented clinically. Research into heat management in elderly populations, whose cardiovascular systems have diminished capacity to compensate for thermal stress, has found that in conditions of high temperature and high humidity, fan use measurably increases core body temperature rather than reducing it. The intervention people reach for in a crisis is worsening the crisis. Here is where the story shifts from physics to urgency. Until relatively recently, climate researchers working on extreme heat events operated under a shared assumption that sustained wet bulb temperatures at or near 35 degrees were unprecedented in the current era. Something that climate modeling projected for the future. A threshold humanity had not yet meaningfully reached that in 2020, a study published in the journal Science Advances appended that assumption. Researchers analyzed decades of hourly weather data from stations around the world and found something the models had not predicted: wet bulb temperatures at or very close to 35 degrees had already occurred. In multiple locations. With increasing frequency, the events were short, measured in hours, not days. But they were real, they were recorded, and they were clustered in regions nobody had highlighted as immediate danger zones: coastal areas of South Asia, the shores of the Persian Gulf, parts of the American Gulf Coast and Midwest. The most striking documented case occurred in July 2015 in the Iranian port city of Bandar Mashar, situated on the coast of the Persian Gulf. Weather stations recorded an air temperature of 46 degrees Celsius alongside a dew point that produced a wet bulb temperature of approximately 34.6 degrees, fractions away from the absolute survival threshold. This was not a remote research station. This was a functioning city. People were living there. People were outside. The Persian Gulf, with its shallow warm water and persistent humidity, has become a region where this combination of extreme heat and extreme moisture is no longer a projection. It is an annual risk. And the population living there has limited access to reliable air conditioning infrastructure in all the places it would need to exist to keep people alive. There is something important about the 35-degree figure that changes how seriously you should take everything below it. 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb represents the absolute physiological ceiling, the point beyond which even a young, healthy adult in peak physical condition, at rest, in the shade, with unlimited water, cannot survive indefinitely. It is derived from laboratory studies under controlled conditions designed to find the maximum. Real life is not controlled conditions. Research on heat-related mortality suggests that for most people, accounting for age, pre-existing cardiovascular or respiratory conditions, the effects of physical exertion, and limited access to shade and water, dangerous heat stress begins at a wet bulb temperature closer to 28 degrees Celsius. For elderly people, who lose thermoregulatory efficiency and may be on medications that interfere with sweating, that threshold is lower still. For outdoor workers doing heavy labor, the heat their bodies are generating internally pushes them past their personal limit long before the air temperature would do it alone. This creates a significant and uncomfortable gap between the number that appears in climate discussions, 35 degrees, the absolute limit, and the number that is actually relevant to most human deaths from heat. Somewhere between 28 and 33 degrees, depending on who you are and what you are doing. The deaths that happened in Europe in August 2003 did not happen because cities reached wet bulb temperatures of 35 degrees. They happened because an unusual combination of moderate to high wet bulb temperatures coincided with a population, elderly, living alone, in apartments without air conditioning, in a continent that had never built infrastructure for sustained extreme heat, that was already operating near its real-world threshold. More than 70,000 people died across the continent in a single summer. France alone recorded approximately 15,000 excess deaths in 2 weeks. The distance between 28 degrees and 35 degrees wet bulb is not a margin of safety. It is where the majority of heat deaths have always happened. And we are spending more and more time in that range. The people most affected by the approach of wet bulb thresholds are not the people sitting in air-conditioned offices reading climate reports. They are rice farmers in Bangladesh and Odisha working through monsoon season, where temperatures and humidity levels have begun to combine in ways that exceed their body's capacity to manage. They are construction workers in Qatar and Dubai who continued building infrastructure through summers that, according to the same wet bulb metrics, should have been physiologically unsurvivable for extended outdoor labor. They are elderly people in European and Japanese apartment buildings that were not designed for the summers they are now experiencing. The geography of wet bulb risk overlaps almost precisely with the geography of poverty, outdoor labor dependency, and limited air conditioning access. The physics do not discriminate. But the infrastructure and economic conditions that determine who can get behind the only thing that reliably works above the threshold, cooled indoor air, are distributed with extreme unevenness. Air conditioning is the one intervention that reliably extends survival above dangerous wet bulb temperatures. It works because it does not just move air, it removes heat and moisture from it. It lowers both components of the wet bulb calculation simultaneously. But globally, fewer than half of households have access to air conditioning. In South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, the regions projected to experience the most severe wet bulb conditions in the coming decades, that number is far lower. And the energy demand required to run widespread air conditioning at scale creates its own contribution to the atmospheric conditions driving the problem. Back to the fan on the table in front of you. The fan is not the villain of this story. The fan is a useful tool in conditions that allow it to work. Below the thresholds described here, on a warm but manageable day, moving air across your skin is one of the best things you can do to stay comfortable and safe, but the conditions in which the fan stops being useful and starts being harmful are no longer hypothetical. They exist. They have been recorded. They are increasing in frequency and duration. And the vast majority of people who live in regions where those conditions now occur have no reliable way to know when they have crossed from fan helps into fan accelerates the problem. Wet bulb temperature is rarely reported in public weather forecasts. Most people have never heard the term. We are given air temperature, heat index, feel like numbers. We are told to drink water and stay out of the